Alice, and today I thought we could have a little chat about some very exciting new books that are being released in the first part of 2022. I'd planned to do this video in January and then I didn't get around to it, but I'll be covering books from January until June, so the first half of the year, and so some of these books have already been published, but I wanted to mention them anyway, and we've actually got a lot of books to talk about, so we should maybe just dive straight in. We're gonna be starting with January, obviously, so these books are already out, and the first one I wanted to mention is Violetta by Isabel Allende. And Allende is an author I really want to read more books from because I read and loved the book A Long Petal of the Sea, and this one sounds right up my alley. This is historical fiction, and we follow one woman's life which spans over 100 years, and it starts off in South America in 1920 when this girl is born to a family that already has 5 sons, and we just follow her through her life, through the Great Depression, and I think she eventually makes it to America, although I don't really know. Usually Allende's books are set like all kinds of different places, and we just follow her entire life. And I just think that sounds really interesting because especially in the past 100 years, I think we forget how much has happened and like how much the world has changed, and so I think it's going to be a very interesting book. And I do love a book that like follows one person throughout their whole life, and I really like Allende's writing, so I really need to get myself a copy of this. Secondly, we have a very highly anticipated book. It's To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara, and this is the first book by this author that I'm actually seriously considering reading because I think that the premise sounds really interesting, but the book is like 800 pages or something, which is too much. Like, I just don't love really long books, but the premise sounds so interesting, so I'd actually love to know if any of you have had time to read this yet and what you thought, and if you think I would like it, because based on what it's about, I think I would. But then it's 800 pages, so I don't know. The story spans over 3 centuries, and I think it's split into like 3 parts, and one is set in like an alternate version of America in 1893, one is set in 1993 in Manhattan during like the AIDS epidemic, and then we have a perspective set in the future in 2093, where the world is like plagued by plague and there's like totalitarian regime, and this is the part of the book that really intrigues me because I really enjoy stories that are about that, but I just can't tell if I'm gonna enjoy it for 800 pages. I will say the sort of concept of this book reminds me of the books by Maja Lunde. They're also kind of structured like that, and those are also longer books, and I really like those, but I just don't know if I want to try this or not. Maybe I should just try it, but then I'm also like really bad at DNFing books, so I'm afraid I'm gonna get like stuck into it, but I don't know. Those of you who have read it, please tell me what you thought. Next, we have Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz, and there's something about this cover that just really intrigues me. There's something about like anatomical hearts that I just love in like art. And so I added this to my TBR and it looks great. This is a gothic tale filled with romance and mystery, which I also love. I do love a good gothic story. And it's set in Edinburgh in 1817, and we meet a female surgeon and a man who I think sells dead bodies. And that's all I really know. Somehow they come together and there's like secrets, and I just think the idea of a female surgeon during this time is really fun, and there's something about like body snatching during this time period that I find very intriguing, so I think this is gonna be fun. I usually don't read romance novels, but if I read them, I do like them to be a little bit like gothic. Then I've got a book that I'm including mostly because of the cover. It is so beautiful. It's Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. And I barely even know what this book is about. It's like a retelling, I think, like a mythology retelling. And it's something about like the Chinese moon goddess. And it is so beautiful. And I just wanted to show you because I feel like everyone needs to see this because it's fantastic. Lastly, for January, we have The Christie Affair by Nina de Gromont. And again, with the 1920s, there's just something about it that I can't resist. This is set in 1925 in England, I'm pretty sure, and and it's basically all about those 11 days when Agatha Christie went missing. Which, if you don't know, Agatha Christie basically just like dipped for over a week at some point during her life, and no one knows where she went or what she did. And I guess this book is basically just a fictionalized version of those days. It says that this is a story of star-crossed lovers, heartbreak, revenge, and murder. And it sort of says that it's not about where Agatha Christie went in those days, but what she discovered, and that's all I really know. Moving on to February, we have got a debut. It's Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. And this one has a really good cover as well. I really like it. And the story is about two estranged siblings who come together when their mother dies. And as they're sort of like sorting through her life, they discover she had this secret life that they didn't know about. And this like digging takes them like from the Caribbean to London and to California. And it says it ends with her famous black cake. I don't know what that means, but I feel like cake is always good. I do love a good story about siblings and secret lives, and I love when a book takes us to different places in the world, so this just sounds really good. Then we have got more gothic stuff with The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas, and this is like supernatural suspense, and it's set in the years after the Mexican War for Independence. And it says there's like a remote house and a haunting and a woman who lives in this house, and it has her in its clutches, and it just sounds kind of spooky. This is horror as well as supernatural, and so I'm assuming there's a lot going on in this book, and I just thought the setting sounded great. And there's also like a priest and a witch, and it all just sounds like kind of scary, but also a lot of fun. Next, we have got a nonfiction book with the most beautiful cover. It's What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. And this is a memoir, and I'm not familiar with this author, but apparently she is a journalist. And in here, she explores PTSD and the science behind it, and sort of takes a look at how that condition has shaped her life, which sounds fascinating. I think we get to read about her life in here, obviously, because it's a memoir, but we also get to read about these conversations that she has had with different like psychologists and scientists, and I think she tries several different types of therapies, and I just think it sounds really interesting. And I love when a memoir like explores a person's life, but also something in addition to that, and so I really want to read this one. Then we are moving on to March, and I've actually only got one book for this month, and it's The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn, and this is apparently a historical fiction novel based on a true story, which is always fun. I'm pretty sure this book starts off in Kiev, where we meet this librarian who loves her job and she loves her son, and those are the two things in her life that she focuses on, and that's everything her life is, basically. And then I think the war breaks out, and she is given a rifle and told to fight, and so she becomes a sniper. Come on, a librarian turned sniper, that sounds awesome. Then in April, we have got Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee, and I'm mostly intrigued by this because it's a heist story, and those are usually really fun. This one says it's a lush lyrical book inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from Western museums. And so it's all about the colonization of art and the Chinese American identity. And I think we meet a man who basically starts stealing art from countries where it doesn't belong. So it's been stolen, you know, from the time when white people colonized the world and basically stole everything. Next, we have got a new book coming out from Emily St. John Mandel, which is very exciting. It's called Sea of Tranquility, and Station 11 is one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I haven't read her second book yet, The Glass Hotel, I think it's called, because it makes me a little nervous because I've heard so many mixed things about it, but maybe I should try to read it before this one comes out. The story in here says it takes the reader from Vancouver Island in 1912 to a colony on the moon 300 years later. And I think that sounds fantastic. Like a trip to the moon, yes please. Although not in real life, I don't think I would ever do that. But I just think the idea of this sounds fantastic. Then we have got Four Treasures in the Sky by Jenny Tingwei Shang, and this is about a woman who is kidnapped from China and shipped to America. And I think she arrives just as like the Chinese Exclusion Act was put into place, which I think is a thing that happened in the 1880s or something, and it prohibited the immigration of like Chinese workers or something like that. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I have heard of it, and the story is about her arriving in America as this is happening and her trying to fight for her place in the world and in this new country. She seems to live quite the life, and I just think this sounds really good, and I read somewhere that there are some like folklore stuff in here as well, which is always great. Lastly, for April, we have Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel, and this, first of all, has a gorgeous cover, and it has been compared to Circe by Madeline Miller, which immediately intrigues me. I think this like reimagines the life of this vilified queen from the Indian epic Ramayana, and it's all about this like overlooked princess who turns herself into a warrior, which I'm all for. And I just think it could be cool to read some like mythology retellings that are not specifically like Greek mythology retellings, even though I do love those as well. Moving on to May, we have got the beginning of a new fantasy series called The Book of Night by Holly Black. And I haven't read anything by this author in years. I read some of her like YA fantasy stuff like ages ago, but now she's writing this new adult fantasy series, which is really cool. It's set in a world where you can do like shadow magic, I think, but it comes at a cost, and doing it can shave like minutes or hours or days off your life. And I think we meet this woman who is a con artist, and she has distanced herself from this type of magic, but then someone reappears in her life, and I think maybe she starts doing it again because she wants to run away or something. And I just think the premise sounds really interesting, and it's been a while since I've read any like fantasy, so I maybe want to try this one. Then we have got This Day Tomorrow by Emma Straub, and the premise of this is, what if you could take a vacation into your past? And personally for me, I'm good, but that sounds like a very interesting premise for a story. We follow a woman in here on the eve of her 40th birthday, and she is like relatively content with her life. She's happy with it, but she does feel like something is missing, and then she goes to bed, and the next day she wakes up in 1996 on her 16th birthday, which sounds like a ride. Can you imagine if that actually happened? Like, that is my nightmare, waking up in emo Alice's 16-year-old body with like black hair and no eyebrows and a head filled with really bad poetry and a deep, deep longing for Orlando Bloom. No thanks. Then we've got a very vibrant cover with You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akweke Emezi. And both the title and the cover of this are just beautiful, which is very intriguing to me. This is a contemporary romance novel about this woman who wants to learn how to feel alive again, and I think that like an accident has killed the love of her life like 5 years ago, and she finally starts wanting to move on, and this like throws her into this whirlwind summer, and that's all I really know. And I usually do not feel super attracted to any romance books, but there's something about this that makes me think maybe I want to give it a go. Lastly for May, we have City of Orange by David Yoon, and this is a like science fiction novel about this man with amnesia who wakes up in an apocalyptic landscape, and he doesn't remember his own name, he doesn't remember how he got there, or like what this world even is. He has some vague memories of his life, but that's kind of it, and so he has to get up and try to survive in this world that he doesn't even recognize. You ever read the synopsis of a book and think, I would die? Like, I would just lay down and die, and that would be it for me. I think about that a lot. Like, I know some people are convinced that they would survive the apocalypse, but not a lot of people would. And I don't think I would be one of them, to be honest, especially if there were zombies, because I am having none of that. No thank you. I would rather just not be here, I don't think. Anyways, tangent aside, this guy does survive in this book, I'm assuming, and we get to read about it. And that sounds very interesting. All right, lastly, for June, we have 3 books. And the first one is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. And this is an author I really want to read more from, and I think the premise of this sounds really interesting. It's about this woman who I think loses her husband, and she's like famous in some sort of way, and so she goes to her family's lake house to avoid the press. And I think there's a house across the lake, and the wife of that house disappears while she's there, and everyone is obviously very suspicious of that, which I would be too. Then we have got Fish Swimming in Dappled Sunlight by Riku Onda, and this is a book translated from Japanese, and it sounds very interesting. It's set over the course of one night in a small apartment in Tokyo. And in that apartment, there are 2 people who are gonna part ways after this. They're never gonna see each other again, but both of them are convinced that the other is a murderer, and they're trying to get the other person to confess. I think the premise of that sounds absolutely fantastic and unlike anything I've ever read, so I really want to read this one. Lastly, we have Woman of Light by Kali Fajardo Amstein. And this is like an epic story of love and betrayal and family, and it spans over 5 generations. And we follow this American indigenous family, and it's set in like the American West, and it just sounds and looks great. I've heard that this author's writing style is really engaging and entertaining, and she's really good at writing characters, which you know I love. And it's like a story of secrets and survival, and you can't really ask for more than that. Okay, everyone, that was a lot of books, but we made it through my entire list, and obviously there are loads more books coming out that are very exciting, but I can't include everything. But if you know of a book that you're really excited about that's coming out soon, I would love to hear about it. As usual, links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!